My father built Harlow and Associates from nothing, and he made sure I never forgot it. Every dinner, every holiday, every Sunday call that lasted exactly 12 minutes before he handed the phone to my mother. Somewhere in there, he'd find a way to mention the firm. The client list, the reputation, the name, Harlow, our name, his name. The name he expected me to carry into a corner office and spend the next 40 years polishing. I was 7 years old the first time he took me to the office. He lifted me onto his leather chair, pointed at the framed diplomas on the wall, and said, "One day, those will be yours." Not asked, not suggested, told. I didn't say anything. I just looked at the diplomas and thought about how the frames were crooked. Growing up in a family of lawyers is its own kind of pressure. Not the loud kind where someone screams at you across the dinner table. The quiet kind. The kind where every conversation about your future is already decided before you open your mouth, and your only job is to catch up to the conclusion they reached without you. My father was a senior partner. My mother had given up her own practice when I was born. A sacrifice she never mentioned, but somehow always communicated. My older brother went to law school at Georgetown and joined the firm 2 years ago. He's being groomed for partner. Everyone acts like this is simply how the world works, like gravity. I tried for a long time to want what they wanted. I went to undergrad pre-law, I did well, I sat through constitutional law seminars in college and thought, okay, I can do this. I can be this person. I took the LSAT my junior year and scored in the 94th percentile. My father called that night. Not to say he was proud, exactly, but to say it was acceptable, which from him was the closest thing to a standing ovation. But there was this other thing I kept thinking about. The semester before my LSAT, I'd taken an elective in legal technology. Something I picked half out of curiosity, half because it fit my schedule. The professor, a former federal prosecutor who'd gone into legal tech consulting, spent 3 weeks talking about how broken the legal industry was from the inside. Document review that took paralegals weeks and cost clients hundreds of thousands of dollars. Contract management that ran on email chains and spreadsheets. Discovery processes that were essentially archaeological digs through filing cabinets. And then she showed us the tools that were starting to fix it. I don't know how to explain what happened in that classroom without sounding dramatic. But something unlocked. I stayed after every session. I started reading everything I could find about legal tech startups, about the intersection of software and law, about the firms that were already falling behind and the ones building what came next. I wrote my senior thesis on AI-assisted document review and its implications for mid-size litigation practices. My father read it. He called it interesting but not the real world. I applied to law school. I got in. Good schools, 2 of them. And then I deferred. I asked for 1 year to pursue something I needed to explore. I told my parents I had an opportunity to work at a legal tech startup in Austin, a small company building contract management software for small and mid-sized law firms. The founder had seen my thesis. He'd emailed me. The salary was modest, but it was real. My father's response was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds longer than a normal pause. Then he said, "You're going to throw away a law career to write code for people who didn't make it as lawyers." I told him that wasn't what the company did or what I'd be doing. I'd be working on product development, client integration, understanding how firms actually operated so the software could serve them better. It was valuable work. It was work I wanted to do. He said, "When this doesn't work out, the offer to join the firm will still be there, but I won't make it twice." My mother didn't say anything. She just looked at her hands. I moved to Austin 3 weeks later. I want to be honest about what the next few years actually look like, because I think people have this idea that stories like mine are about some unbroken upward line, some montage of hustle and success. That's not how it happened. The startup was chaotic and underfunded, and the founder, for all his vision, was not a great manager. I worked 18-hour days trying to make a product that didn't yet know what it wanted to be. I made 23 mistakes for every good call. I learned more in 8 months than I had in 4 years of undergrad, and not in a comfortable way. But I also started to understand the legal industry in a way that I don't think I ever could have from inside a firm. I was talking to managing partners, to paralegals, to billing coordinators, to the people who actually ran the infrastructure of these practices. I was learning where the money leaked, where the time went, where the real frustrations lived. And I started to see a gap that nobody had quite filled yet. The startup folded after 14 months. The founder ran out of runway and the pivot he wanted to make was the wrong one. We parted on decent terms. I didn't call home. I took 2 weeks to think. Then I started writing a business plan. The company I had in mind was different from what I'd been building, more focused. I wanted to build a compliance and contract management platform specifically for law firms navigating regulatory changes, the kind of mid-sized practices that were too big to do it manually and too small to afford enterprise solutions. There were hundreds of thousands of them across the country. None of the existing tools were built by people who actually understood how they worked from the inside. I did. I spent 6 months refining the model, talking to potential customers, building a prototype with a developer I'd met in Austin. I applied to 3 accelerator programs. 2 rejected me. 1 didn't. It was based in Chicago, well-respected, and it came with seed funding and 4 months of structured mentorship. I called my parents the night I got accepted. My father said, "You're still doing the software thing." Not a question. I said yes. He said, "Okay." My mother asked if I was eating enough. That was our last real conversation for almost 2 years. I'm not going to pretend that didn't hurt. It did. I'd spend Sunday evenings sometimes just sitting with my phone, thinking about calling and then not calling, because I already knew how the call would go. My brother texted occasionally, short, practical things, links to articles, the occasional "hope you're good" that didn't invite a real response. We weren't close. We'd never been close. He'd always wanted the thing they built, and I never did, and that difference had always sat between us like furniture we'd both agreed not to move. The accelerator changed things. Not overnight, but structurally. The mentors pushed me hard on pricing, on sales strategy, on how to talk to lawyers in a language they trusted. I learned that the best product in the world fails if the person selling it can't speak the buyer's dialect. And lawyers have a very specific dialect. I hired a salesperson who'd spent a decade at a regional firm before burning out on practice. She could walk into any managing partner's office and have a fluent conversation before she ever opened a laptop. We closed our first 10 clients in the first 4 months after launch. Not huge firms, but real ones. Paying ones. By the end of year 1, we had 42 clients and had just crossed $800,000 in annual recurring revenue. We raised a Series A $4.2 million from a firm in San Francisco that specialized in B2B SaaS. I remember sitting in my apartment the night the wire hit the company account and thinking about the crooked diplomas on my father's wall. I didn't call home. By the time I was 30, we had over 200 law firm clients across 28 states, a team of 31 people, and revenue that I wasn't yet comfortable saying out loud in family company. I'd moved back to the Chicago area, not for them, but because it made sense. The Midwest legal market was significant, and I wanted to be closer to it. I bought a condo in Lincoln Park. I furnished it slowly, the way you do when you actually have time to think about what you want instead of just filling space. I thought about my parents sometimes. I wondered if they thought about me. The answer came in a way I didn't expect. My assistant mentioned it first, actually. She said a new firm had submitted a request for a demo through our website, a boutique litigation practice in the northern suburbs. She mentioned the name because she knew my last name and thought I should know. Harlow and Associates, 14 attorneys, founded by a senior partner with 32 years of experience. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be clear about something. I didn't plan what happened next as a performance. I didn't engineer it. The demo request was real. The need was real. They were exactly the kind of firm we were built for, and I could have assigned it to any one of my account executives, and no one would have thought twice. I decided to take the call myself. Our standard enterprise demo was a 90-minute video call with a screen share, usually involving whoever requested it, plus their office manager and sometimes a couple of senior associates. I reviewed their intake form. The person who'd submitted it was my brother. He'd listed himself as the administrative point of contact for the evaluation. I put his name in the calendar invite along with 2 other standard slots and sent it from my work email. My first name is my first name. My last name is the same as theirs. I didn't hide anything. I simply didn't announce anything either. The morning of the call, I signed into the conference room 20 minutes early. I had coffee. I went through my notes. This was, by that point, something I'd done dozens of times. It was just a demo. My brother joined the call first with his camera off. Then the office manager, whose name I didn't know. Then my father, whose camera was also off for the first 30 seconds before something changed and I could see him. Older than the last time, reading glasses now, the same dark wood bookshelf behind him that had been there my whole childhood. He was looking at something on a second screen. He hadn't looked at the camera yet. My brother said, "We're ready to get started. We have the managing partner joining as well. We wanted him to see the platform before we move forward with pricing conversations." I said, "Of course. Welcome everyone. I'm the founder and CEO. Thanks for making time." My father looked at the camera. The silence that followed lasted about 3 seconds. It felt longer. He said my name, just my first name, the way parents do when they're not sure what register to use. I said, "Hi, Dad." My brother said something I didn't catch. The office manager unmuted and then immediately muted again. I said, "I know this is unexpected. I'm happy to have one of my account executives take over if you'd prefer. But I'm also happy to continue. The platform is what it is regardless of who's showing it to you, and I think it would genuinely help your practice." My father didn't say anything for another moment. Then he said, "How long?" I knew what he was asking. I said, "We started about 6 years ago. We've been working with firms like yours for about 4. He said, "The funding." I said, "We closed our Series B last year." He nodded, slowly, the way he used to when he was processing something he hadn't anticipated. The demo continued. I want to be honest about that too, because I think people would expect that moment to be triumphant, sharp-edged, a kind of reckoning. It wasn't exactly. It was strange and careful, and there was an undercurrent of emotion in the room that none of us directly named. I showed them the platform. My brother asked good questions. He'd done his research, and despite everything, that made me feel something uncomplicated and almost fond. The office manager asked about data security. My father mostly watched. At the end, my father said, "This is good work." 3 words, but from him, those 3 words sat differently than most people's paragraphs. After the call, I went back to my desk, and I closed my office door, and I just sat there for a few minutes. Not crying, exactly. Not laughing. Just processing the specific weight of being seen by someone who stopped looking. My brother texted me that night, not about the platform. He just said, "I didn't know." I wrote back, "I know." He said, "I'm sorry it took this long." I held the phone for a while before I answered. Then I wrote, "Me too." My father called on a Thursday evening about 10 days after the demo. I almost didn't answer. I did. He said he'd been talking to my mother. He said they wanted to take me to dinner if I was open to it. He didn't offer an apology in that call, not in so many words, but there was something in the way he asked, the careful way. But he already understood that the asking itself was a kind of admission. I said yes. Dinner was at a restaurant in Evanston they'd been going to for 20 years. White tablecloths, the same waiter who apparently recognized them. My mother cried a little when she saw me. She didn't make a big thing of it. She just touched my face the way mothers do, and then she looked away and asked the waiter about the specials. My father waited until we'd ordered to say what he'd come to say. He said he'd spent a lot of years thinking that guiding me meant deciding for me. He said he understood now that those were different things. He didn't ask for absolution. He's too careful a man for that. Too precise about what words mean. He just said he was glad I'd built something real, and that he was sorry he hadn't been there to see it happen. I looked at him across the table. This man I've been afraid of and furious at and grief-stricken over, sometimes all at once. This man who'd handed me a future I didn't want and couldn't understand why I wouldn't take it. I said I needed to build it myself. I think you understand that more than you realize. He looked at his water glass. He nodded. We talked for 3 hours. My mother told me about a trip they'd taken to Portugal, about my brother's girlfriend, about the neighbor's dog that had been an ongoing neighborhood controversy for 18 months. Small things, normal things, the kind of things that fill in the years you weren't there for. Harlow and Associates signed a 2-year contract with us the following month. My brother is now our internal champion at the firm. He emails my account executive regularly, and I hear he's been recommending us to other practices in their network. My father and I have Sunday calls now. They last longer than 12 minutes. I'm not telling this story because I think it proves something about hustle or success or any of the things people put on motivational slides. I'm telling it because for a long time I thought the distance between my family and me was the cost of becoming who I needed to be, and maybe it was for a while. But I don't think it has to be permanent. I think sometimes people need time to understand that love and control are not the same thing, and that watching someone build a life you didn't plan for them is not a loss. It's just a different kind of legacy. And I think, slowly, carefully, the way my father does everything, he's starting to understand that too. I keep coming back to the moment my father said, acceptable, after my LSAT score, not proud. Not excited. Acceptable. I was 21 years old and I remember thinking, okay, that's what love sounds like in this house. You earn it, you measure it, and even then, it comes out lukewarm. It took me a long time to understand that what happened between us wasn't really about law or software or career choices. It was about two people who both believed in their own way that they were doing the right thing, and neither of them knew how to say that to the other. Here's what I know now. The distance that grew between my family and me didn't happen because I chose the wrong path. It happened because I wasn't willing to let someone else's definition of a good life become a cage I lived in quietly. That's not defiance for its own sake. That's just the basic act of being honest about who you are. And I genuinely believe, that kind of honesty is the only foundation anything real can be built on. The years between that first Austin apartment and the morning of that demo call weren't glamorous. There were stretches where I genuinely wasn't sure the company would survive another quarter. There were nights I sat with a spreadsheet open and thought about how much easier it would have been to just go to law school, join the firm, stop fighting the current. The temptation wasn't weak. It was real and it was regular. But I'd learned something in that first startup, in the collapse of it, in the rebuilding. The problems that push you hardest are the ones that teach you what you're actually made of. You don't find out what you're capable of when things are going well. You find out when the runway is running out and you're the only one in the room who still believes the thing is worth saving. That persistence, the kind that isn't flashy, that nobody applauds, that you do mostly alone at odd hours. That's what built the company. Not talent, not a perfect plan. Stubbornness in service of something real, and the integrity piece. I could have taken shortcuts. Early on, a potential investor wanted me to overstate our user numbers in the pitch deck. Just a little, he said. Everyone does it, he said. I walked away from that meeting and I didn't look back. Not because I was noble, because I knew that a company built on a number you invented doesn't actually belong to you. It belongs to the lie. And eventually, the lie collects. My father built his firm on 32 years of showing up and doing honest work. He understood that, even if he didn't always understand me. When he looked at the camera that morning and said, "This is good work," I think he was recognizing something he'd raised in me without realizing it. The same standard, just applied to a different field. The call with my mother and father at dinner, the 3-hour conversation, my brother texting late that night, none of that erased the years. But I don't think it needed to. Some gaps don't close, they just stop being the whole story. What I've learned is that the people who push back hardest against who you're becoming are sometimes the ones who need the most time to grieve the version of you they'd already planned for. That's not cruelty. That's just how deeply they loved the idea of you. I'd rather have the real thing.